There is a kind of connection that doesn't end the day someone walks away. It doesn't disappear when messages stop. It doesn't vanish because silence takes over. Some bonds move deeper the moment distance begins. They become quieter, more invisible, but strangely more powerful. And if you have ever loved someone who seemed to run the moment things became real, then you already know how confusing that can feel. You gave sincerity, patience, warmth, and understanding. You showed up with your whole heart, yet somehow, the closer the connection became, the further they drifted. And what hurts the most is that from the outside, it can look like they escaped easily. It can look like they moved on untouched while you were left carrying the weight of everything. But there is another truth many never see. Some people leave physically because they do not know how to stay emotionally. Some people walk away not because the bond meant nothing, but because it meant too much. And when the person they left behind was a super empath, the kind of soul who loves deeply, sees beneath masks, and gives safety where others give judgment, that bond often becomes impossible to outrun. Because you were never just another relationship, you became a mirror, a refuge, and a kind of love they may never fully understand until it is gone. At first, they may convince themselves they did the right thing. They may tell themselves they needed space, freedom, clarity, or independence. They may distract themselves with work, entertainment, new faces, or constant busyness. On the surface, it can seem like relief. No pressure, no vulnerability, no one asking them to open up, no one getting close enough to touch the places they keep guarded. But silence has a way of revealing what noise can temporarily hide. And when the distractions fade, something begins to echo. The memory of being understood without having to explain. The memory of someone noticing pain they never admitted out loud. The memory of feeling accepted while still being flawed. That kind of experience is rare. Many people offer attraction. Many offer attention. Fewer offer emotional sanctuary. And when someone leaves a sanctuary they secretly needed, peace becomes harder to find elsewhere. This is where the silent bond begins to show itself. It appears in random thoughts they cannot control, in moments where they compare everyone new to what they lost, in nights that feel strangely empty for reasons they cannot name, in the uncomfortable realization that the person they left brought something no replacement can imitate, because what they received from a super empath was not just affection, it was presence, it was emotional intelligence. It was patience during their withdrawal, softness during their tension, and love during moments they struggled to love themselves. Many only understand value after absence introduces contrast. They do not miss what was loud and obvious. They miss what quietly held them together. And this is why leaving does not always mean letting go. Sometimes leaving is simply what happens when someone lacks the tools to handle intimacy. They may know how to disconnect, but disconnection is not the same as healing. They may know how to shut doors, but that does not mean the room inside them becomes empty. In fact, many who leave carry the connection with them more than the one who stayed. The one who stayed usually feels the pain directly, cries honestly, grieves openly, and slowly heals through truth. But the one who runs often delays grief. They bury it beneath motion. They numb it with avoidance. They deny it through pride, and delayed pain has a habit of returning stronger later. If you were the one left behind, this can be hard to believe. You may remember how cold they became, how distant their eyes looked, how quickly they seemed to detach. You may wonder if any of it was real. But emotional shutdown is not always proof of indifference. Sometimes it is proof of incapacity. Some people freeze where others feel. Some detach where others communicate. Some flee where others stay and work through discomfort. Their response says more about their wounds than your worth. And many avoidant people are experts at appearing unaffected while carrying storms no one sees. What makes the bond with a super empath especially difficult to escape is that this type of love reaches beneath performance. A super empath often sees the hidden fear behind arrogance, the loneliness behind independence, the tenderness beneath defensiveness. They do not just react to behavior. They sense the pain creating it. That can feel beautiful and terrifying to someone used to staying hidden. Beautiful because for once they feel seen. Terrifying because being seen means their usual defenses stop working. Masks only survive where no one looks closely, but a deep empathic connection looks directly into the truth. So they may leave not because you failed, but because your presence invited growth they were not ready for. You challenged them without attacking them. You loved them without controlling them. You cared enough to notice patterns they hoped no one would notice. And growth can feel threatening when someone has built an identity around emotional distance. To grow means to admit pain exists. To receive love means to lower walls. To stay means to become accountable. Many want connection, but fewer are ready for what true connection requires. After they leave, another painful reality often emerges. They search for the comfort you gave without realizing it was you who made the comfort possible. They look for excitement, chemistry, distraction, novelty. But excitement is not the same as emotional safety. Chemistry is not the same as being understood. Novelty cannot replace depth. They may meet many people and still feel unsatisfied because what they hunger for was never surface level to begin with. It was the nervous system calmness of being with someone genuine. It was the sense that they did not have to perform to be accepted. It was the rare feeling of being emotionally held. That is why future connections can feel strangely flat, not because no one else has value, but because depth cannot be mass-produced. The super empath offered something rooted in soul-level presence. They listened beyond words. They loved beyond moods. They stayed present during emotional weather most people avoid. Once someone experiences that, ordinary interactions can feel empty by comparison. They may not consciously say, "I miss that person." Instead, they say, "Something is missing." But often, that something had a name, and while they wrestle with that emptiness, you may be wrestling with self-doubt. You may wonder why someone who needed love pushed it away. You may question whether being kind made you weak. You may fear that deep love only leads to pain, but hear this clearly: your capacity to love was never the problem. The problem was giving depth to someone who had not yet learned how to receive depth. Water is not flawed because a closed cup cannot hold it. Your love did not fail because they fled from it. Their avoidance only exposed the limits of where they were emotionally. There is also a hidden reason they replay you in their mind. A super empath often becomes associated with the first taste of genuine emotional safety. Even if they could not sustain it, some part of them remembers how different it felt. Human beings are wired to remember places of refuge. We remember where we felt calm, seen and accepted. We remember where our nervous system softened. We remember where loneliness paused. So even after leaving, they may find themselves thinking of you during stress, confusion, or emotional emptiness, not always because they want to reconcile, but because their inner world remembers where peace once lived. This can create a conflict inside them they rarely express. One part wants freedom from vulnerability. Another part wants the comfort of connection. One part says distance is safer. Another part says loneliness is exhausting. One part insists they did the right thing. Another part keeps revisiting the past. And when these inner voices collide, many do what they know best. They become silent. But silence does not equal resolution. Often it is where unresolved feelings go to hide. Meanwhile, something important is happening in you too. Pain is forcing clarity. You are beginning to see that not everyone who leaves is powerful. Sometimes leaving is the easiest option for someone who cannot face themselves. Staying, communicating, apologizing, growing, being consistent, those require strength. Running requires far less. And once you understand this, the story changes. Their departure stops looking like proof that you were not enough. It starts looking like evidence they were not ready. This is the turning point many viewers need. Stop measuring your value by the behavior of someone emotionally unavailable. Stop assuming their distance defines your worth. Stop believing that because they left, they escaped untouched. Many carry consequences internally long after the relationship ends. They lose trust in themselves. They lose the rare experience of being loved deeply. They lose the person who brought warmth into cold spaces inside them. And often, they only recognize the size of that loss when it can no longer be reclaimed. Because super empaths do not stay broken forever. They grieve deeply, but they heal deeply too. They cry, reflect, learn, and transform. They become wiser. Their boundaries sharpen. Their standards rise. Their tenderness remains. But it is now protected by discernment, and this creates one of life's great ironies. The person who once felt impossible to keep eventually becomes impossible to access. So if you are watching this while wondering whether they ever think about you, whether the bond mattered, whether they truly moved on untouched, remember this: some people leave your life before they understand what you were. Some bonds haunt not because they were toxic, but because they were real. Some hearts run from love only to spend years missing what they could not handle. And some connections cannot be escaped because they were never merely physical. They lived in the nervous system, the memory, the soul, and the lessons that follow long after goodbye. And that is where the story often becomes even more painful, because what many people never see is what happens after the silence settles in. On the outside, they may look fine, they may appear busy, confident, distracted, or completely unaffected. They may post smiles, chase goals, talk to new people, and carry themselves as if nothing significant was lost. But appearances can be carefully managed. Inner emptiness cannot. There are moments no one else witnesses, moments when the room gets quiet, the phone is put down, the noise stops, and the truth rises to the surface. In those moments, memories begin to return with surprising force. They remember the way you noticed subtle changes in their mood before they said a word. They remember how you sensed tension behind their silence. They remember how you offered comfort without demanding performance. They remember being cared for in ways they did not know how to ask for. And this is why they replay you in their mind long after the relationship ends. Because the mind returns to experiences that carried emotional meaning, especially the ones it failed to understand while living them. Many avoidant people are skilled at suppressing emotion in the moment. They disconnect when feelings intensify. They intellectualize pain instead of processing it. They convince themselves they are better off because distance feels calmer than vulnerability. But the nervous system keeps records the mind cannot erase. It remembers where safety was felt. It remembers where loneliness softened. It remembers who made chaos feel quiet. So even if they tell themselves they moved on, their body and subconscious may continue returning to the memory of you. This is why random triggers can affect them more than they admit. A song that played during a peaceful drive, a phrase you used often, a scent that reminds them of closeness, a place where they once felt unexpectedly relaxed beside you. Suddenly, emotions they thought were gone rise again. They may feel restless without understanding why, irritated for no clear reason, nostalgic when they least expect it. That is the hidden power of unresolved bonds. They wait beneath the surface until something wakes them. And when those memories rise, many of them experience something they rarely talk about: regret. Not always dramatic regret. Not always the kind that leads to apologies or grand gestures. Sometimes it is quieter. It sounds like, maybe I left too soon. It feels like wondering whether fear made the decision instead of truth. It appears in comparing everyone new to what was lost. It grows when life becomes stressful and they realize the one person who once brought calm is no longer there. The emotional void after leaving can be difficult for them because they often do not recognize it for what it is. They may call it boredom. They may call it restlessness. They may say they just need excitement or change. But sometimes what they are actually feeling is the absence of emotional regulation you once provided. You were not just a partner. You were a soothing presence. You helped stabilize moods they did not know how to stabilize alone. You offered reassurance during stress. You softened inner chaos with consistency. When that presence disappears, they may suddenly feel more irritable, more anxious, more disconnected from themselves. But instead of tracing it back to the loss, they often seek external fixes. They chase stimulation, they overwork, they scroll endlessly, they flirt, they start new routines, they fill schedules, anything to avoid sitting with the emptiness. Yet emptiness that comes from emotional loss cannot be solved with activity. It asks to be felt, not escaped. This is why so many enter rebound situations that fail to satisfy them. They may find someone attractive, someone exciting, someone new enough to distract them. And for a short time, novelty can feel like relief. The unfamiliar creates dopamine. The attention soothes ego wounds. The fantasy of a fresh start offers temporary hope. But novelty has an expiration date. Once the excitement fades, the same inner patterns return. Because the real issue was never the previous partner. The real issue was their relationship with intimacy itself. If they still fear vulnerability, still avoid emotional accountability, still shut down when closeness deepens, then every new connection eventually reaches the same wall. Different face, same pattern, different chemistry, same emotional distance, different beginning, same ending energy. And this is where many start comparing without wanting to admit it. They notice that new people may be fun but not grounding, attractive but not nurturing, available but not emotionally intuitive, interesting but not deeply loyal. They begin to realize that what they lost was not just companionship, it was depth. It was being known beyond surface traits. It was someone who could sense what was wrong before words were spoken. It was someone who cared enough to stay present when things became emotionally inconvenient. The super empath often leaves a standard that others unknowingly struggle to meet, not because others are less worthy, but because genuine emotional depth is rare. Many people can offer attraction, many can offer conversation, many can offer attention when things are easy. Far fewer can offer warmth during emotional storms, far fewer can hold compassion without self-erasure, far fewer can love someone who struggles to receive love. And when they realize this, another discomfort appears. Guilt. They may remember times you asked for simple honesty, and they withdrew, times you needed reassurance, and they became cold, times you were patient while they criticized, delayed or distanced. They may recognize that you were trying to build connection while they were protecting walls. This can be a painful truth, because it means admitting they hurt someone who truly cared. Some cope with guilt by blaming you, others cope by pretending you were replaceable, others cope by acting indifferent. But guilt pushed down does not disappear. It leaks into mood, relationships, confidence, and self-respect. Deep down, many know when they mishandled something precious. They may never say it aloud, but they know. Meanwhile, you may still be carrying questions. If they missed me, why didn't they come back? If they regretted it, why didn't they apologize? If the bond mattered, why did they act so detached? The answer is often painful but simple. Feeling something and having the emotional maturity to act on it are not the same thing. Missing you does not automatically create courage. Regret does not automatically create accountability. Love does not automatically create readiness. Many people feel deeply while behaving poorly. Many know the truth while still avoiding it. Many want connection while resisting everything required to sustain it. This is why waiting for external validation can keep you trapped. You may be waiting for someone to become in months what they resisted becoming for years, and while they wrestle with their patterns, something sacred can begin in you, awakening. You start seeing that your role was never to rescue someone from themselves. You start understanding that compassion without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. You begin realizing that loving deeply should not require tolerating emotional starvation. The more you heal, the clearer the past becomes. You notice how often you carried the emotional labor alone. How frequently you translated silence, excused distance, minimized hurt, and hoped potential would become reality. You see that your empathy was beautiful, but when misdirected, it became the bridge someone crossed without learning to meet you halfway. This clarity can feel heartbreaking at first, but it is also freedom, because once you understand the pattern, you stop personalizing it. Their inability to sustain intimacy was not proof that you were too much. Often it was proof that genuine closeness exposed everything they were avoiding inside themselves. And this is why new partners do not fix the loss. No person can solve an internal wound someone refuses to face. No relationship can replace the inner work they keep postponing. No distraction can permanently numb unresolved fear. They can change environments, partners, cities, routines, but until they confront themselves, the same emptiness follows. Some spend years learning this lesson the hard way. They move from connection to connection, searching for a feeling they once had with you. But feelings rooted in emotional safety cannot be recreated through novelty. They are built through honesty, vulnerability, consistency, and trust, the very things they ran from. For the viewer listening right now, maybe you still wonder if you were unforgettable. Hear this carefully. People forget what was casual. They do not easily forget what transformed them. They do not easily forget the person who saw behind the mask. They do not easily forget the one who brought peace into a nervous system addicted to distance. You may not receive a confession. You may not get closure wrapped in the words you deserved. You may never hear the full truth of what your absence taught them, but silence does not mean you were insignificant. Sometimes silence means the truth is too confronting for someone who still avoids themselves, and while they may continue searching outward, your path now asks something different of you. It asks you to stop measuring your impact by their response. It asks you to trust that some lessons you gave will only be understood in your absence. It asks you to recognize that the love you offered was real, even if it was mishandled. Because one day, whether they admit it or not, they will likely encounter a moment where everything slows down and clarity arrives. They will realize they were loved by someone rare. They will realize they mistook emotional safety for something ordinary. They will realize that leaving solved discomfort but created loss. And by then, your life may already be moving in a new direction. Your heart may be softer, wiser, stronger. Your standards may be higher. Your peace may no longer be available to those who only appreciate it after destroying it. That is the hidden justice of growth. The one who ran often learns through emptiness. The one who loved learns through healing. And in the end, only one of those paths leads to freedom. And that is where the story turns again, because after the emptiness, after the distractions begin to lose their effect, after the comparisons quietly start happening in their mind, many avoidant people enter a phase they rarely show anyone. It is the phase of silent observation. They may not knock on your door. They may not send the message they have typed and deleted 10 times. They may not confess what they feel, but they often begin watching from a distance. They check your presence in subtle ways. They glance at your social media. They ask mutual people how you are doing without making it obvious. They search your name. They revisit old conversations. They wonder whether you are happy, whether you miss them, whether someone else now receives the warmth they once took for granted. This behavior can confuse many people because it seems contradictory. If they cared, why not speak? If they miss you, why remain hidden? Because distance feels safer than vulnerability. Watching lets them feel connected without risking rejection. Curiosity lets them stay involved without accountability. Observation lets them taste closeness while protecting the ego. It is one of the most common patterns in emotionally avoidant dynamics, wanting emotional access without emotional exposure. And while they watch from afar, something else may begin to happen that they did not expect. You start changing. At first, your healing may have looked messy, tears no one saw, sleepless nights, replaying conversations, wondering what you could have done differently, missing someone who could not meet you properly. But healing is rarely glamorous in the beginning. It is raw, it is lonely, it is the slow rebuilding of self-worth after loving someone who made you question it. Then one day, something shifts. You wake up and think about them a little less. You stop checking whether they viewed your story. You stop imagining the apology. You stop needing answers to survive the day. You begin investing energy back into your body, your dreams, your friendships, your peace. The sadness that once flooded every hour now visits less often. And in its place comes something powerful, clarity. You start seeing yourself again. This is the glow-up many misunderstand. It is not just looking better, dressing better, or appearing happier. Those things may happen, but the real transformation is internal. Your eyes change because confusion leaves them. Your posture changes because self-respect returns. Your energy changes because you stop leaking it into someone unavailable. You become attractive in a different way, the kind that comes from emotional alignment, and this is often when they notice. Sometimes they notice because your silence has become real, sometimes because you no longer orbit their moods, sometimes because your energy feels lighter, stronger, less reachable, sometimes because people who once had unlimited access become alarmed when access ends. They may see photos of you smiling genuinely, hear that you are thriving, and sense that your attention is no longer waiting in the background. And for many avoidant people, this creates a feeling they struggle with deeply: delayed recognition. They begin to realize your love was not guaranteed, your patience was not endless, your presence was not something they could shelve and reclaim whenever convenient. What they once treated as stable and always available now appears scarce. Human beings often awaken to value when entitlement is removed. This is why some return only after the empath begins to detach, not always because they have changed, but because loss has become tangible. As long as they believed you would remain emotionally available, there was no urgency to grow. But once they feel your absence as reality, anxiety can replace complacency. Yet even then, closure can feel impossible for them. Why? Because closure requires honesty. It requires naming what happened without hiding behind excuses. It requires admitting fear played a role. It requires acknowledging that someone loved them well and they mishandled it. It requires facing the version of themselves they would rather avoid. So instead, many seek symbolic closure rather than real closure. They may send a casual message, react to a story, test the waters with vague friendliness, mention a memory, ask how you are doing with no deeper context. These are often attempts to reconnect without fully confronting the truth. For the empath, this can reopen wounds if boundaries are unclear. You may interpret crumbs as transformation, curiosity as commitment, nostalgia as readiness, but not every return is repentance. Sometimes it is loneliness, sometimes ego, sometimes temporary discomfort seeking familiar relief. This is why your growth matters so much now. The healed version of you begins to ask better questions. Not do they miss me, but can they meet me? Not do they feel bad, but have they changed behavior? Not do they want access, but are they capable of reciprocity? These questions protect your future, because one of the deepest truths in this journey is that being missed does not equal being valued correctly. Many people miss what they cannot sustain. Many want back what they did not know how to honor. Many feel pain at losing comfort without being ready to become safe themselves. And inside them, another battle often grows stronger, the battle between ego and emotion. Their ego says, do not reach out. You might be rejected. You might look weak. You might have to apologize. You might lose control. Their emotion says, you miss them. You hurt them. You still think about them. You know that connection mattered. Their ego says, move on. Pretend nothing happened. Their emotion says, nothing has felt the same since. This inner war can last months or years. Some resolve it through growth. Others spend a lifetime suppressing it. But suppression has a cost. The cost is numbness, repetition, and the inability to receive the kind of love they secretly crave. Meanwhile, you may be learning a different lesson, the lesson of self-trust. You begin trusting how drained you felt trying to carry the relationship alone. You trust the anxiety your body felt around inconsistency. You trust the disappointment that came each time hope was offered then withdrawn. You trust that love should not require constant guessing. This self-trust becomes a compass. Once an empath learns to trust themselves, the old dynamic loses power. Breadcrumbs no longer intoxicate. Mixed signals no longer feel romantic. Potential no longer outweighs patterns. You stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. And that can be shocking to the person who once depended on your tolerance, because many avoidant people unconsciously rely on others doubting themselves. As long as you question your worth, you may accept less. As long as you blame yourself, you may keep chasing. As long as you hope hard enough, you may ignore reality. But when you become clear, grounded, and self-respecting, the old system collapses. Now they face someone different. The version of you who once over-explained is now calm. The version who once chased is now selective. The version who once begged for clarity now walks away from confusion. The version who once saw only their potential now also sees their patterns, and that is why closure becomes even harder for them, because they are no longer dealing with the old you, the one available on old terms. They are meeting the consequences of delay. Time does not just pass, it transforms people. While they were avoiding, you were evolving. While they were numbing, you were healing. While they were protecting pride, you were rebuilding identity. This is the part many viewers need to hear deeply. Your suffering was not wasted. Every tear taught discernment. Every disappointment strengthened boundaries. Every sleepless night pushed you toward truth. Pain became wisdom when you chose growth. So if they watch from afar now, let them witness the result of what they lost. Let them see peace on a face they once filled with confusion. Let them see confidence where self-doubt used to live. Let them see that love did not break you, it refined you. And if they return, you no longer need to decide from loneliness. You get to decide from clarity. That is power. Because the old pain asked, why wasn't I enough? The healed heart asks, why did I settle for less than I deserved? The old wound asked, will they choose me? The healed soul asks, do I even choose this anymore? That shift changes everything. There is also a final truth in this stage. Time does not automatically heal everyone equally. Some use time to grow, others use time to avoid. Some become wiser, others become more practiced at running. Some face their wounds, others build prettier cages around them. So when someone reappears, do not be hypnotized by time past. Measure transformation by consistency, humility, accountability, emotional availability, and sustained action. Anything less is memory trying to disguise itself as destiny, and destiny does not require you to abandon yourself. The bond may have been real, the love may have been deep, the lessons may have been sacred, but your future is not obligated to repeat what your past had to teach. Sometimes the greatest closure is not hearing them finally understand your value. It is watching yourself never again forget it. And that is where the final chapter begins, because once you reach this level of clarity, you start to understand something many people learn far too late. Time does not automatically break every bond. Some connections fade because they were built on convenience. Some disappear because they were rooted only in attraction, timing, loneliness, or circumstance. But there are other bonds that survive distance because they were formed in places deeper than routine. They were formed in vulnerability, emotional imprinting, nervous system memory, and soul-level recognition. Those kinds of connections do not always vanish simply because people separate. This is why months can pass, even years can pass, and yet certain people still think of each other at unexpected moments. A song, a season, a scent, a city street, a phrase someone else says, a random quiet evening when life slows down enough for memory to enter. Suddenly the mind returns to someone it has not spoken to in a long time, not because life has stopped, but because unresolved depth leaves traces. For avoidant people especially, time can become deceptive. They often believe distance equals healing. They assume that if enough days pass, enough distractions happen, enough new experiences arrive, then the bond will naturally weaken. But avoidance delays emotional processing. It does not replace it. Unfelt feelings often wait in silence until life becomes still enough to hear them. That is why some people only understand what they lost years later, not when they left, not when they were busy proving they were fine, not when attention from others was plentiful, but later when the noise lowers, when patterns repeat, when they recognize they keep meeting people but not finding depth. Then memory becomes less romantic and more revealing. They begin to see that the connection they ran from was not the problem. Their fear of intimacy was. And what do they secretly miss most? They may say they miss your smile, your voice, your kindness, the way you cared. But often what they miss most is how they felt around you. They miss feeling safe without earning it. They miss being accepted without performing. They miss having someone who could read pain beneath silence. They miss the emotional warmth that made life feel softer. They miss the calm their nervous system experienced in your presence, even if they were too defended to appreciate it then. Many avoidant people mistake peace for boredom when they first encounter it. Chaos feels familiar, so calm can feel strange. Consistency feels unfamiliar, so they misread it as lack of excitement. But later, after cycles of instability and surface-level encounters, they realize peace was never boring. It was rare, and that realization can sting deeply. Because once they understand your value, they may also understand your absence. They may realize the one who truly loved them is no longer emotionally waiting. The one who once answered instantly now takes their time or does not answer at all. The one who once poured energy into understanding them now protects that energy carefully. The one who once saw only their potential now sees reality with clear eyes. This is where super empaths often fully let go, not with hatred, not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. They stop trying to awaken someone committed to sleeping through their own life. They stop offering loyalty to inconsistency. They stop translating mixed signals into hope. They stop making homes inside people who only know how to visit emotionally. And when an empath lets go from wisdom rather than anger, it is different. Anger can still be hooked to the past. Wisdom walks forward. This kind of letting go is quiet. It may not look dramatic to the outside world, but internally, it is one of the most powerful things a person can do. You release the need to be chosen by someone who could not choose themselves. You release the need for an apology to validate your pain. You release the fantasy that love alone could have healed what only self-work can heal, and then something beautiful happens. Your energy returns. The energy once spent overthinking texts becomes creativity. The energy once spent waiting becomes movement. The energy once spent doubting yourself becomes confidence. The energy once spent rescuing becomes self-respect. That is the rebirth many people call a glow-up, but it is far deeper than appearance. It is the return of life force to the one who had been pouring it into the unavailable. And often this is when they come back. Not always physically, sometimes emotionally, in thought, sometimes through a message, sometimes through watching quietly from afar, sometimes through a late confession after years of silence. But when they return, they often meet someone different. They expect the old access. They expect the old softness without standards. They expect the old version of you who would reopen the door simply because they knocked. Instead, they meet a person who still has warmth, but now has boundaries. A person who can care without collapsing. a person who can listen without abandoning themselves, a person who can love without accepting crumbs. That change can shock them, because many people unconsciously assume others remain frozen where they left them. They imagine the person they hurt is still waiting in the emotional position they last saw. But growth changes the landscape. The house they abandoned has been rebuilt, renovated, protected, and no longer belongs to strangers. And this is where the final truth becomes clear. Some bonds cannot be escaped, but that does not mean they are meant to be reunited. This is important for every viewer who confuses intensity with destiny. A bond can be unforgettable and still unfinished. A connection can be real and still unhealthy. Love can exist and still be insufficient without maturity. Two people can care deeply and still be unable to create something safe together. The purpose of some bonds is not lifelong partnership. Sometimes it is awakening. They awaken wounds that need healing. They awaken patterns that need ending. They awaken standards that need rising. They awaken self-worth that had been sleeping. They awaken the understanding that chemistry without consistency becomes pain. So if you were the empath in this story, maybe the deepest meaning of the connection was not that you were meant to chase them forever. Maybe it was that you were meant to find yourself through losing them. And if they were the avoidant in this story, perhaps the bond follows them because it introduced a kind of love they were not prepared to receive. Some lessons do not leave just because a person leaves. They echo until integrated. That is why certain names remain tender years later. Certain memories still carry charge. Certain people become reference points in the heart. Not because life should stop there, but because some experiences permanently expand what love means to us. For the one listening with tears in their eyes, still wondering whether they mattered, hear this clearly. You mattered in ways silence may never confess. You impacted places inside them they may not know how to describe. You represented a level of love they may spend years trying to rediscover. But your value does not depend on whether they admit any of that. Your worth was true before they arrived. It remained true when they left. It is true now. And perhaps the greatest victory is not them realizing they cannot escape the bond. It is you realizing you no longer need it to feel whole. Because once you become whole, the story changes. You stop asking who lost who. You stop counting whether they think of you. You stop romanticizing pain because it once felt intense. You stop confusing longing with love. You stop revisiting closed doors hoping they become homes. Instead, you become available for something new, something reciprocal, something calm, something emotionally mature, something where your empathy is cherished rather than consumed, something where communication is normal, not rare, something where peace does not have to be earned through suffering. And that is the real ending. Not whether they come back, not whether they regret it, not whether they still feel the bond. The real ending is that the person who once felt abandoned becomes anchored within themselves. The person who once begged for clarity becomes clear. The person who once feared being left becomes someone who can walk away from what dishonors them. The person who once poured love into closed hands learns to pour it where it can grow. So yes, some avoidants may never fully escape the bond with a super empath, but the deeper miracle is when the super empath finally escapes the need to be loved by someone unavailable. That is freedom, that is healing, that is power, and that is how your story truly begins.